Okay, morning everyone. I hope you are quite excited about the announcement from the Prime Minister yesterday. Things are going back to a little bit of normalcy. For those people who are fighting the front line, hang in there. For those people who are here for a bit of learning, for a bit of informal learning, feel free to join in. Webcam is optional. If you are too shy or whatnot, you can always chime in over the chat. This is going to be less of a very formal session, but more of an informal session. So anytime you have a question, just type it on the chat. There'll be a dedicated Q&A afterwards as well. So thank you so much, Kai-Sin from HighSpark, for spent an hour and probably more for the preparation of this session. This is a fire chat on improving visual engagement. My name is John Ta. You can call me John. I'm from IL Innovation Center. So some heads up, take the advice from today's session with a pinch of salt. Different trainers have different style of training. And then there will be a dedicated session up to 40 minutes for you to ask Q&A afterwards. And then let me just introduce Kai-Sin quickly. She's one of the Forbes 30 under 30, not 30 over 30, 30 under 30 in 2020. And then she has experience in advising C-suite executives of Fortune 500 companies to deliver persuasive visual stories in high-stakes presentation. So without further ado, let me involve Kai-Sin to let her introduce a little bit more about herself. Kai-Sin, please.
Hi everyone, good morning. Very happy to see you guys. I think the introduction is quite sufficient, but if you need to know, I run this communications agency and I've been doing training for the past 7 years. Started pretty young, so actually I think I have a lot to learn from you guys, but happy to share the knowledge that I have revolving around narratives as well as visual.
Okay, so let me just jump in. So today's session is more towards like visual engagement and visual sort of like way of communication. So maybe to start off the morning easy for Kai-Sin, I just want to let Kai-Sin answer maybe the top question that a lot of our communities have in IEL, which is like, do you have any tips or tricks in doing visual engagement in live training? Maybe you can share some of your past experience on enabling such issue.
Right. Wow, actually I have a lot of tips and tricks, but perhaps top three, top three. Maybe before I share, I just want to understand the profile of the crowd so that I can, give very tailored advice. So if all of you here, 46 of you, if you don't mind, just go to the chat and type the kind of training or the topic that you usually train, then I would be able to give you the tips and tricks for that particular context. I think that might be more effective. So go to the chat, you can type the kind of topics that you train. Is it in communications? Are you training people on very technical stuff like policies, fire safety, any kind of topic can be trained, right? So good to hear from you guys, perhaps Chiolin, Cecily, Huilin, Amy. Diversity and inclusion, very, very important in today's leadership, communications, engineering. Wow, quite a wide variety. Special needs. Wow, Albert, that's a very, very meaningful work that you're doing. IE as well. Okay, so based on what I'm seeing, like what John Ta has mentioned just now, right? Take it with a pinch of salt, because there's really no one size that fits all. Later, I will share more with some visual examples so that you understand when visuals would be really important, how to use it in the right context. So perhaps I can jump straight into the tip, right? So first and foremost, I think it's to really understand that visual is meant to be functional. In fact, it doesn't have to be a slide format, When we are doing online or even synchronized training offline, a lot of the visual is based on our expression and also our body language. But in a very tangible visual format, we have to evaluate, number one, who are we speaking to? What is the thing that they appreciate? Do they actually appreciate having more words if it helps them to learn better? Or are they more involved when you talk more and then you interact with them more with your own visual cues through body language? So that's first tip. And then it will help you evaluate what kind of visual would be more memorable and would incite an emotional response in them. We are actually all visual creatures. So if I can, do a very quick experiment, right? Get all of you to close your eyes and think of a chicken. Okay, once you have thought of a chicken, you can open your eyes. What do you have in mind? You can also type it in the chat. When you think of a chicken, what do you have in mind? I'm pretty sure many of you have, eggs, that's very interesting. Okay, and feathers. Perhaps a lot of you have very vivid imagery, right? In fact, majority of us have this capacity to think in a very visual format. So you have to make your choice of words even. That's another visual tip. Your choice of words to be very visual, then translate into a tangible format on your slide if you're using slides to train and to present. Only a small minority might not, but if you make it expressive, they would be able to remember. Then the third one. This one is very, very important because visualizing actually takes a lot of time. So you have to be very resourceful. Don't overdo your visuals if it's not very high stake. Only visualize if it's really going to make an impact because you also have very limited amount of time, right? So yes, we can make very jazzy slides, but that's the ideal. But your job is to actually make the transformation. So don't get too caught up with the formatting, the visuals, if it doesn't actually help you meet your end outcome. So those are top 3 things. Functionality, then you evaluate your words, your choice of words to make it emotionally connecting. And the last one to be resourceful.
Maybe I just want to jump in. I mean, you kind of have a bird's eye view on like this COVID situation because you have existed your company before COVID. So you can kind of compare what happens before and after. So is your job now easier or harder since people are locked in home, and then the way they engage is like either visual or audio, and then you are basically a master in the visual already. So is it easier for you in that way, or is it more complicated? Any stories you could share without getting...
Are you talking more in terms of engagement or...
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's a mixed bag, actually. I believe all of you here will agree with me because clients come from very different background and some of them, they appreciate blended learning. And of course, when it comes to slide design, we have to design it quite differently as well. And when it comes to blended, there's the self-pacing and people can read materials. So it's, to me, actually, I prefer that because I don't believe in averaging the entire class because everyone has very different competencies. So I very much enjoy having people to consume the content. If it's well designed, let them be engaging even without my presence. And then when we do come on live, that's where the value that I can bring increases because I can give more personalized feedback. Or even in between the Zoom session and the self-paced learning, I can record videos to show demonstration, right? How can they transform their slides? How can they make their narrative better? So in fact, I think it is very fortunate for us to have a lot of different tools to make learning engaging. We just have to be more creative and ask, what is it that the people want? And again, resourcefulness, right? Like how can we use the resources, not for the sake of it, but really to up our game? Because I think a lot of things that we can do online cannot be done offline. In fact, there are more things that we can do online. So I think it's a very exciting journey and many of our clients have actually seen a transformation. In fact, we did this survey, right? After the workshop, we asked them, if given a choice after COVID, would you, number 1, prefer to move back to synchronous learning offline? Or number 2, make it completely virtual, so cut and paste, also synchronous learning. And then number 3, blended learning. And majority of them actually chose blended learning. But disclaimer, it depends on company's culture and also their work schedule, etc. So pros and cons, that's my experience.
Okay. Yeah, moving on to my next question. This is the question already saved up. Does it matter to like jazz up your offline learning material? There is a trend that IL picked up, which is that people are less likely to sort of like pay full fee for online training. In the survey done in 2020, a lot of the respondents mentioned that yes, we love blended training as you have found out, but like the establishing that value for money is very difficult given that lack of face-to-face training or face-to-face interaction. So maybe in your opinion, like by adding back the value in like making offline training material more more visually appealing, does it make sense, or in fact it's kind of like effort that is that resources could be redirected to better avenues, etc.? Yeah, what's your opinion on that? Yeah.
Again, there's no one size that fits all, and I understand that some of you deal with more complex information. In those cases, it would definitely be helpful if you have those details online. But how do you present and package it? That's a different different things. And some of you have the opportunity to deal with your clients in a much more heart-to-heart manner. And I wouldn't say slides would be the best medium. In fact, if you can make it as interactive as possible, I think that would be good. So to answer your question here on, I would like to share some visual example. They say show not tell, right? To help you to evaluate where you are and what kind of tools or techniques you can use in order to make your online learning more engaging. So if we are talking about something that is self-paced, or even if it's synchronous online learning, we actually divide slides into a slide where it's very brief and a slide document where you have more words, it's very self-explanatory so that people can read on their own. So if you're recording a video with a visual aid, I would recommend you to create a slide so that people can look at you, provided that you have your face captured in the video, so that they can look at you. But if you don't have your face as a visual aid, then it's okay actually for you to create a slide document, maybe with some form of animation. And when we talk about visual, you realize the right-hand side, it's not like top-down bullet point kind of slides. It's well organized, like you see in a magazine or newspaper, where we direct people's attention to the main message so that they know what to look at next and then last, right? So I think it's more of the visual flow that reduces the confusion. And then the other thing also, in terms of how we want to engage, again, both offline and online, this is another slide that you can use as like a yardstick, right? What exactly are you doing? So you realize the same visual, same as the previous slide, right? We have the guy with the hat, but two slides were very different. But now, using the same visual, this lady, you realize the placement of the content, the amount of details that we put in is quite different. But the message still stands. You can see the headline, join us in our pursuit. So if that's a key message, it has to be very apparent. So regardless of how much content you have on your slide, that's up to you. Again, based on functionality. But what is the most important? It's really for you to ensure your audience are engaged in a way that it's very logical. Because the moment when you clutter your slide with a lot of bullet points or text, they don't know what to look at. And immediately, our brain switches off because it's trying to save us energy, right? So make it exciting for the brain, have some form of surprises. And I think that's a best form of engagement.
Yeah, maybe just kind of like walk us through what is the time commitment to sort of like bring like the slide you've shown, like so I kind of want to set a realistic goal for people maybe who are starting on this or maybe who are upgrading their game. Like roughly how long is the engagement or how long is the time period it will take typically to go from maybe like the very normal slide to something that I see that looks quite professional?
Wow, it's a very difficult question. it really depends on...
Yeah.
It's like if you ask me to if like I'm not trained in carpentry, right? If you ask me to make a chair, I think I would take like a couple of years, but to someone who's very skilled, it's probably going to take maybe a day or two, right? So again, you would hear me say a lot, it depends. But okay, so number one is, do you have existing template and tools? In fact, there are a lot, later I can share in the chat, right? Or after this, we have an email with all the resources. There are templates out there where you can just drag and drop, change the words and insert a visual, very, very easy. You can actually create a deck of slides of 20 within an hour. Whether it's effective, that's the other thing. If you really, really want to spend time on something that's very high stake and the content is very complex in a sense that it's very hard to take a word and visualize it and then translate it into something that people can understand. So that actually takes a long time, or like, sequencing the flow. In fact, designing slides in a very professional manner is like designing an advertisement. I'm not so sure how many of you are familiar with ad agencies kind of model, right? They actually have a team of maybe like 5 to 10 to design one poster, and just the tagline itself or even the color scheme sometimes can take like a couple of weeks. So it really depends on the extent, right? But if I were to give you a range, I would say anywhere between, if you are looking at maybe a full day of workshop of perhaps 50 slides, right? It can take anywhere between 1 day or 1 week. depending on the amount of resources. I feel like I'm not really answering a question, but that's like the case.
Understand. I mean, everything is sort of like based on your experience. And over here, we do have a range. We do have someone who is a lot of experience, and we do have people who are sort of like just starting, or maybe thinking to already doing training because they're part of the job, but they just want to bring it to be more efficient. Okay, I'll open the questions to the floor. If you have questions, just switch on your webcam if you have, or just unmute yourself. You can also raise your hand if you want to queue up the question, or you can just type in your questions on the chat as for now. Meanwhile, while people are formulating their question, I do have one sort of like additional question that I want to add to Kai-Sin here is roughly in terms of like balancing between like overloading and then the client expectation. I want to push all this content because like sort of like in the corporate world is I pass it to you, the buck is on you to like sort of like pick up and everything. So how do you find the balance in making sure that yes, the design work, the visual engagement work, at the same time is informative enough such that the sort of like the liability has been passed on, the full info has been passed on, it doesn't blow back on like, hey, I thought you never shared it with me, that kind of statement.
Yeah, that's a very valid question, because in some setting, I think people do appreciate more information, especially when it comes to legal, or people need to study for exams, right? The more the better actually. But again, it depends on how we present it. So I can take this time to share with you a process that we teach in our visual class, and content, visual, they work hand in hand. So in order to evaluate how much goes into your slide, you can use this framework. The story that you saw, it's kind of faded, right? So we typically try to uncover what is the overarching theme of the entire presentation. Now, the point is the most important, because every single slide, ideally, we have one key message. So you can have sub-points supporting the key message, and then you decide whether you have space to put in imagery, how you're going to organize your content so that people would be able to comprehend, to process the information in a quickest way possible, and then overall look and feel, right? So using shades, colors to amplify. So this process, if we were to kind of break it down, or I can show you some visual example, it might look something like this. So if you see the before and after, they actually have around the same amount of information. But what happens here is we are very clear about the key message that we want to amplify, and then we organize the information in a way that it's more engaging. And then you see some of these numbers over here, right? Where my mouse is, this is where we want people to focus on in terms of ranking. The same for this as well. Sometimes we have a lot of information and we have chunk of paragraphs or like long sentences. Very hard for people to translate it into a visual format in their head. That's what we're doing as an audience, right? So again, we want to call out the most important message. So we are not oversimplifying, because I think sometimes people say, oh, less is more, but sometimes less is actually less. It's okay to add in more words, in fact, in your headline to capture what the gist of your slide is about. So it gives people a choice, either just look at the headline, capture the gist, or if they're interested, they can look at the details. So giving people that sense of flexibility is very important, especially if you're dealing with a group of audiences with very, very different priorities. And this is the last example. You see on the left-hand side, you have a bunch of information, right? So do we need all of these rows and numbers? And again, it's the process of understanding. It's not so much about telling people what it is, but what is happening. Rather than like just license support overview, is there an action we want people to take on this slide? In this case, you can see at the after, right? It's about, showing the difference between underutilized and overutilized licenses. And then some of the things can also be bolded, like purchase ad user. Wow, if you compare this number, a few hundred versus just less than 10, maybe there is a message there. Then again, following the PILL process under look, you can use certain shapes, way of organization in order to amplify your message, so that at first glance people know what is it. So it saves the brain a lot of time to figure out what the slide is about. So if you do want to go through visualize the slide, you can perhaps use this process. And then again, I want to stress that it's not about having less information. In fact, some of these slides, right, a lot of information like this might look really clean, but just changing the layout itself, same amount of words, just by changing the layout itself, already make a big difference in how people comprehend the information. So I hope this is helpful for you.
Okay. Yeah. So I have a quick question from Brian. Brian asks, will you be sharing some like templates, resources, tech tools? Yes, Kaisin will be sharing like a point of resource, almost like a link, sort of like all-in-one kind of resource that people can suggest later. We'll share closer to the end of the session. The same link will also be on the follow-up email that we'll send to every participant here as well. Okay. Next, Miss or Mr. Tang has asked about, do you suggest to sort of observe at first encounter to assess the audience type to create the visuals? Like maybe you can share some past experience if like you have the chance to sort of like know the audience first or don't have the chance to know the audience first. These two scenario. How do you deal with both?
Okay. Typically, when we are trying to know the audience, we also have to ask what exactly do we want to know and how that affects our learning materials, right? So if we get a chance to know them, a couple of things we'll assess is number one, the type of content that they deal with. And then number two, I think in a more purposeful manner, it's why exactly are they here in this training? What is the transformation that needs to take place? Then how does my training material help bridge that gap to make that transformation happen? Is it more of a knowledge gap or is it more emotional? Like if I have to walk through with them to make them realize certain things, then wow, they would transform, right? Or is it more of a capabilities? So based on this three gaps, if it's knowledge, I would put a lot of information in a handout and then synthesize and put it on my slide. If it's more emotional, I would not do too many slides, perhaps focus more on interaction, discussion. I believe you guys are familiar with this. And then the third one, if it's more capabilities, there would be a lot of exercises, maybe like role play, and yeah, so it really depends. And if I do not know my audience, how I would assess these few elements is by, of course, researching. So if I can at least understand what department they're from, it would help me infer what kind of information they're dealing with and the kind of problems. And also, I think the position matters a lot because different people have very different proficiency level, right? So it gives you clue as to how advanced they are. And of course, I usually, when I work with HR, try to tell them that, hey, I really want to make the training useful. It's very important for me to find out this information because I think the last thing you want is for them to come in and it's like, oh, I really know all of this thing, right? So usually they are quite open as long as they feel like you're helping them to make the training successful, then they can also be accountable to their participants because that's also part of the KPI, right, in terms of satisfaction. And I think more than not, you would be able to find information as long as you craft your questions skillfully.
Yeah, thanks for that sharing. I'll open the question to someone who wants to verbalize it. Maybe you are just dying to have this question. You want to say it. You have been locked in the house, not much talking or just typing email away. So if you have any questions you want to verbalize, please feel free to do so now. Just unmute yourself and just introduce where you are, who you are, and what's the question. Yeah. Anyone? Or if not, continue to type the questions on the chat.
Hi, Kaisin, Wayan here. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Maybe just piggyback on what Jonta was talking about. What's your experience, say, shifting presentations over to virtual? Any change in how you would format it, present it, in terms of information on the slides? What's your experience like? Any adaptation?
Right. Truth to be told, the answer is no. We have not much adaptation, and I'll tell you why. Because just now I talk about slide and slide document, right? All this while, even for offline, we see the importance of having the form of engagement, and facilitation. So our slides are very brief, which already is very online friendly. So I can't speak for all of you because I do not know the format of your slides. But if your original slide is filled with words, then I think you need to cut down on that because people are also going on mobile and they learn. If you have a lot of words on your screen, it's going to be quite hard to read. So what we do differently online is our worksheet. In the past, it might be brief, like, a lot of blanks, and then they can fill in. But now we have more explanation just in case, number one, the connection gets cut off, right? If we are doing synchronous virtual learning. Number two, they might not be able to catch up, and I'm not able to see, whether they're falling behind or not because we are not in the same physical location, and they might need or they might appreciate more explanation or clearer instructions. So in fact, we add more information in the handout rather than less. But in a slide format where they see and they learn, those are still the same. It's going to be brief, and a lot of times it has a lot of visual demonstration in order to make sure that they comprehend. Yeah, so that's my experience.
All right, thank you very much.
Does it answer your question fully?
Yes, good enough.
Okay. Yeah. So I just have a follow-up that sort of like I noticed some trainers love the animation. The exploding view and then like a window moving around in and out. So make it very fancy. Do you have any opinion on animation? Is there a limit or too much animation in that way?
Yes, again, back to functionality. If you don't need animation, doesn't help to clarify your message or help your audience to understand, I would say take it away. Especially if you're doing online, there is lag time. You cannot be sure that people will be following you. So less is actually good. And I would say you only use animation in order to facilitate some form of flow, or you really need it to make an impact. Otherwise, I actually advise against animation at all. Just strip away all the bells and whistles, not really necessary.
Okay, we have one more question coming in. What would be the best font to use for keynote slides and sizing? Maybe I paraphrase this, what would be your favorite font to use?
I have no favorite font, but we do have a brand font. Recently we changed it. It's called Dagular. I can type it in the chat. Dagular text and display. And in terms of font, if we are talking about those fonts that are already pre-installed in your computer, I actually prefer Helvetica the most, Helvetica New, because font is another science altogether, but to me, in my opinion, I think it's the most well designed. And in terms of font size wise, there is again really no one size that fits all, but your heading should be very, very clear. So I think the typical rule is 24 point, right? It's like, because for minimum on your slide, it would be 12 or 11 for smaller text.
Yeah, maybe I want to add on this. I actually attended a training under SG Enable. So if you have learners with dyslexic, or like they can't really tell words, numbers, right? There is a special font for that. If your learner needs it, I think we can sacrifice the style over functionality in that way to make sure that like everyone can be included. Yeah. So just to add on this interesting fact.
That's very cool.
Okay, I think Brian also asked about cognitive loading. So cognitive loading is basically the amount of memory, that short-term memory you can hold at one point of time. So do you have any advice on maybe applying the theory behind cognitive loading and then the research behind it on creating slides or content for learning in general? Yeah.
Yes, definitely. There are actually a lot of tools. So the first one is chunking. So basically the idea is we categorize things according to similarities, right? In fact, we do this in our daily lives, how we organize our closet, the coats. Is it based on color, or is it based on occasion or texture, fabric, or how we, organize our furnitures as well. So we're already doing it in daily life. It makes it a lot easier for your mind to string together those things. So ideally, when your presentation is really long, you can try to break it down into 3 to 5 chunks or categories. Then the next step is if you can apply certain rhetorical devices, meaning like alliteration, where you have maybe like 3 categories, right? Then things sound the same, they rhyme, then it's easy to remember. Or you can have some form of like parallelism or patterns. You can go and research on rhetorical devices. But basically, you want to have some form of organization and pattern so that people can remember. Say, for example, fire safety, right? Rather than just like, oh, go here, turn left and right, or these are all the different technical things that you have to take note of. Yes, it's important, but it's so hard for them to download and then remember. But if you can use FIRE as an acronym, also another rhetorical devices, like F for find the nearest exit, then I for identify any potential hazard, etc., then R for something else, then E for something else. Then at the end of the day, if you ask them to summarize, okay, so what is this entire presentation it's about? Then they can say FIRE. And what does it stand for? Then break it down. So you can look at it like a pyramid. You have the most important thing at the top, and then you break it down into 3 other important points. Then in individual important points, you break it down into three other important points. So it becomes a lot easier. Then the last tip, which is very important, is the use of analogy. It's one of my favorite tools because analogy are like compressed stories, and they tap on our existing knowledge in order to tell our brain that this is something very important. So from a cognitive level, the more connections we can form with our existing experience, the more memorable it would be. So it's kind of like, okay, I use analogy, it's kind of like, you know, when you walk on a grass patch, then one person walk, then okay, it might maybe have some footprint, but the more you walk, or more people every day, walk in and out, bicycle somewhere, more and more days, that particular path will become obvious. And then it would start to form a very distinct walkway. So that's something that's happening in our brain as well. The more you connect, the more reinforced the idea gets in. And also, I think you would be able to see things in very different perspective as well. And it does help the audience to remember, to make it feel like, hey, this is something that's purposeful because it's repeated.
Yep. Thank you for that sharing. I think Prajit has follow-up question. Font size 28, is it okay? I'm guessing this is for the non-heading. In fact, in my personal experience, I think 28 is fine. For me, it really depends on how big is the screen, if I need to share. So that really, but Kai-Sin, please add in your 2 cents on that. Yeah.
I would say, okay, maybe I'll share a couple of examples, then you guys can evaluate why is it not so effective to fix yourself to a font size. So it depends on how you're gonna place your text, right, in terms of hierarchy. These are just some mock-ups that our company, mock-ups of the work that our company does. So if you take a look at these visuals on the right-hand side, these are 4 different slides. The first one that you see where my cursor is, this is the heading. It's definitely more than 28 point. And then whatever you see here, 20%, it's also very big. It's definitely more than 28. So if you're designing a slide rather than a slide document, there is no fixed limit as to how big your font should be or how small. Definitely, okay, the rule of thumb is it legible? Then you also have to see, like, are you speaking to elderly people or people who are short-sighted? Then if you are doing offline, what is the setting of the room as well, right? Is it going to be a very big space? Is the screen big or small? So all of this you have to consider rather than just being very fixated on something, because a lot of our learners, when they get too fixated on a checklist, they start to lose purpose or lose sight of the purpose as to why we need these guidelines in the first place. And the same thing is with like slide count limit, right? A lot of people ask me, hey, should we limit our number of slides in a presentation? But what's the point? It's actually because you want to be brief. But some people, they limit. They say, okay, 5 slides only. But they put 20 slides worth of information in that 5 slides. Then, it backfires. So the end objective or the form of evaluation is always, why do we want to know this? Okay. And then it's okay to break the rules sometimes as long as it meets your objective. So these are some examples. And then if you take a look at the left-hand side, of course, we have more content, but it's also very visual. And definitely some of the font size, it's smaller than 28. but it still brings across the message. It's a little bit too small for you to see because it's a mock-up, but I hope this kind of gives you an idea that there is, again, no one size that fits all.
Okay, yeah. So following up on the font size and design, I think Sally asked any advice on colors and themes, maybe what color to avoid, or best to use white or colorful background.
I see. Okay, colors, very interesting. I would like to split this into two. One for your audiences who are not color, do not have any color deficiency, and another for a set of audience who do have, which usually it's a handful. So the first one is, number one, again, it depends on setting. A lot of times having colored background, again, it depends on functionality. Are people going to print your slides? If they are, they're going to hate you for putting color backgrounds for every single slide. It's like, oh, my printer ink waste, right? So white color, the best. Then the second is, how are you going to present it? Is it digital or is it in a physical setting? Is the room bright or is it dark? If you notice that a lot of conferences, right, slides tend to have dark backgrounds, not because it looks more futuristic or cooler, but it's for a very functional purpose. Because in a dean room, if your slides are very glaring, which is light color, like white background or other light backgrounds, it's going to be too harsh on the eyes over a long duration of time. So having something that is darker actually helps to contrast the text with the background. But if you're in a room that is brightly lit, it actually doesn't really matter. But my key preference is you use dark background for divided slides. That means if your entire presentation has 3 categories, you use a darker slide to tell people that you're moving from the first category to the next, so that people can see the transition. Just like flipping books, chapter, the first page is always very different from the second page. And in terms of colored background, if you really want to do like just now I showed a mock-up, the very snazzy kind, then typically having colored background add to that level of uniqueness, novelty. Yeah. And then in terms of the designing slides for those who are colorblind, in fact, there is a very specific shade of blue as well as orange that would cater to people who are, of different spectrum of color deficiency, because it's not just one. And it would be very helpful for you to know the palette, especially if your slides are very heavy with charts. So you deal a lot of numbers. Contrast is very important to call out the key message in different diagrams and charts. So knowing that would be good. Let me dig out some examples. Perhaps we can move on to the next question. And once I found the example, I can show it to you what the palette is.
Okay, so this is just a follow-up question. I realized that from the profile over here, there are some trainers that's working under a company or freelance trainer, or they have their own training providers. Oftentimes, it's not them who call the shots on the visual. They know best practice. They have to convince someone this is best practice. Do you have any tips on that? Again, with people and then it's like your mileage may vary, but I'm also sometimes faced with that in my workplace where, hey, I think best way, but it's an uphill battle to sort of convince other people that to think alike, which is healthy, but just maybe have some past scenario you want to share on that.
Yeah, this is a question this is a concern that I hear a lot from my participants. It's like, oh, I really like your workshop, but my bosses should be in this workshop because, they don't allow the best practice. So what happens, right? I think first and foremost, we have to evaluate why is it that they're so resistant. So it's not about trying to push our way to say we are right and they're wrong, but they have reasons to stick to what they are familiar with, even though in our eyes, it might not be the best. So we have to evaluate that and then try to have a proper conversation with them as to why. Some people, okay, the usual ones, in terms of best practice is, number one, how much information should go on a slide? A lot of bosses like more information. So my participants would say, I try to simplify, but they just keep adding more. You have to vet through before it goes to the final person, right? Then it's very frustrating. Then they give up. So number one, why do they want those information? And if the answer is because they feel that it's a very important topic, and if the information it isn't captured in the slide, whoever is the recipient might not be able to use it to make an informed decision. Then now we know that, okay, is that an alternative way to find a win-win? Number one, don't compromise the slide engagement or appeal. At the same time, don't lose important information. So then maybe we can use the speaker notes, right? Some of the elaboration can go under speaker notes. And then you can surface this suggestion to say, I understand this is important to you. Is it okay if we do it this way? Then the second thing is sometimes maybe they just do not know why. They just like to do their own way and they cannot explain. That's fine. Then we have this other technique or trait, which is to introduce change little by little. Because sometimes, we're very gung-ho, right? Wow, learn all this tape. Then suddenly, wow, our slides look very different. And it might come to a shock for people who maybe 20, 30 years looking at slide in a very traditional format. Suddenly, your slide is so visual, right? They get very very disoriented. What's happening? Where should I look at? So if you were to slowly transition, they don't even realize that actually you're moving towards the right direction. And then eventually, maybe after a year or two, they might buy into the best practice without them even knowing. So when we introduce change, I think it's good to do it bit by bit so that it doesn't come as a shock. So to summarize, number one is to always know the intention to then tackle that when you have a win-win situation. Number two is to bit by bit change. Okay, rather than ask for forgiveness, not permission. It doesn't work all the time. So I have to give warning. Doesn't work all the time. It depends also on company culture. Yeah.
Okay, so HL have a question on, are there sort of infographics software you would suggest? So the baseline probably should be like PowerPoint slides. You can create charts and 3D objects. Anything beyond that?
You mean tools, is it? Available free tools?
More like what you have used previously, or maybe some of the experience you have in the past.
To be honest, a lot of things can be done on PowerPoint as well as Keynote, depending on which machine you're using. But if you're looking at something that is available online where there is already like pre-built templates and you can easily edit, I do have a couple of resources and also like some promo code that we got from our partners, which I can share later on. So perhaps I would leave it at the last. Would that be fine?
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So anyone else have further questions? If not, if you have, just switch on your webcam and then just unmute yourself, or just unmute yourself and introduce yourself first.
Yeah, guys, while you're in here, can I ask another question?
Sure.
This in a virtual context. I'm sure you have seen nowadays the platforms, they allow for kind of newsreader kind of presentation where your video feed is appearing together with your slides and in the slides. Any thoughts on that as compared to the more traditional camera feed on one side and slides on one side?
You capture that, Aisin?
Not quite. So you're comparing the traditional and what is the newsreader thing that you are talking about? Is it where they have a green screen and then at the back they have some content?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So your question is which one is better, or what's my opinion?
Yeah, what are your thoughts on both of those?
Okay, I think there is a lag. So I saw you nodding. I will take that as a visual cue. I personally feel that especially when we are moving in this, we are in a technology age, right? Where there's a lot of tools that we can use, but I feel like we don't have to use it for the sake of it. Because a lot of times we can be very elaborate with the setup, but actually it achieves the same purpose. So then for me personally, I would like to evaluate the amount of time, resources, and ability that I have. In fact, a lot of the things can be done without that virtual background. It can be cool, but when it comes to editing, I feel like it would be a downside. But if I were to have my slide, slide and my visual is different. If I want to do any post editing, say I have a typo on my slide, I want to change it. Or maybe I said something or like certain movement. Because it's not integrated, I can edit it separately. So I would think ahead in terms of how I can repurpose the information as well. And do I have a studio? Do I not have? In fact, there are other tools which I use. Say if we were to record, because I assume the question usually when people have green screen is recording, right? There's this other tool that we can consider called Loom. It forces us to give very, very bite-sized feedback or to record very bite-sized modules. So you have a mini phase at the bottom, and then you have a slide. So if your worry is having the visual and the slide side by side might make either or be very, very small, then this would be a very good option. Or there are so many other tools out there that you can use to edit. Green screen wise, personally, I do think it's very elaborate and it's also costly. It's good to have, but not really necessary. I don't think it personally makes much of a difference unless you have like cool special effects, like a dinosaur appearing behind or something.
Yeah, I have one more thing to add for that. There's also another software called It's not I invent the name one. It's just this is quite a powerful feature that IEL has added to the CE tools. You can sort of like load out, instead of like virtual background you're seeing here, sort of like the slide that you can control. We find this a lot better for especially if you have learners in mobile function, because in mobile your slides and your screen and your face looks all very small and squeezed together. So with this and there are other software as well, you could control how big and small your slide may look like. So sort of like give you more control. But again, with mobile screen that's not 5 to 7 inches, there's not really much you can do in that way. And that's the limitation that some of my IEL colleagues found as well. Yeah, Kai-Sin, you want to add to that? In terms of mobile?
I believe, Jonta, you're referring to training that is more synchronous, right? Okay. So if that's the case, I do agree that there is merit in having a green screen or like your face and the slide together, because sometimes you do not know what view people are looking at and your face might not even appear. So it depends a lot on your vocal expression to engage as well as the visual slide. If you're confident with that, I think that's fine. But otherwise, there's another way. If you don't have like elaborate green screen, right? There is a hack actually. If your computer processing power allows you to change your virtual background, do you know your virtual background can actually make it into a slide? So just save a little portion for yourself and then have your content here, but it's a little bit nano that you have to, change the visual every single time. So if your workshop is more interactive and you only have a handful of slides, I think that could be a quick hack rather than having a very elaborate setup, go and paint your room into green and stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Any further questions from the floor? Just feel free to unmute yourself, introduce yourself quickly, or just post it on the chat as well. Meanwhile, while people are formulating their questions, I do want to jump in. I think you mentioned about mixing emotion to make something memorable. So in your opinion, in the corporate setting or in the more formal setting, which emotion is the most powerful that you should tap on? Or maybe some experience in the past that you have done for some of your clients to make their messaging really stick.
Which emotion? Is there a couple of emotions you have in mind?
I guess like the basic is like, do you prefer to latch on the positive emotion, emotion, or is there a specific maybe scenario in the past that you could recall off the top of your head that the client would really target like emotion?
There are clients who are very conservative, and tapping on a negative emotion like showing cautionary tales would be very, very effective in order to nudge them and egg them towards change. Because I mean, in their mind, it's just like it's very risky to change. They don't want, not broken, why fix it, right? So tapping on that negative emotion, not to like do fear mongering, but to make them realize that, hey, staying put is actually much more risky than changing. So having anecdotes, illustrative stories would be very helpful. But on the other hand, there are also leaders, especially leaders, they are very optimistic. They get very excited when there are new ideas and new opportunities. So you want to tap on that positive emotion by showing them the possibilities, painting success stories of other people to say that, hey, this could work and we could, do another breakthrough or find another way in order to move ahead, and it excites them. And it also depends on the context, because sometimes, actually a lot of times, as the C-suite level executives or leaders, they are pressured by other people to take on certain position or certain hat, right? So even though maybe innately they are very positive and they are very optimistic, but they have to be risk averse because they have people to be accountable to. Then you need a blend of both. Yeah.
Is there a particular example you can quote? I'm reminding you that you probably signed lots of NDA, so just be careful to share the example. But
Sure.
You can bring us back to maybe the planning stage, or anything you could sort of behind the scene, give us some on this, on how do you latch on the emotion, or maybe just general, how do you use emotion? Yeah.
I can share one example. I won't give too much detail, but also at the same time keep it general.
Yes.
So this is a particular project for a keynote speech for a president of a really big company. They sell microcontrollers, like the chip you have in your devices, either in cars and stuff, to automate certain things. And it was in the context of India, and they have an initiative, or rather like a direction from the HQ in the US, and they have to bring that direction to India. It's two very different markets, right? And who this president is speaking to in the conference or convention, it's actually a mix of business owners who are from medium-sized companies, and then also developers who actually are excited about building new technology and new products. And of course, you have the bosses sitting in to please a lot of people, mixed bag of audience, right? And one of the main concern that the president had is the people, like the business owners in India, don't feel that the market is ready to take on the new technology or the strategy ahead. They feel like, we are not really, we don't really have the technical infrastructure, and it's too advanced for us, talking us about smart home, what? We don't even have certain other things covered yet. So a lot of people were quite skeptical, and also I think they were quite fearful that if they were to buy into the idea, a couple of things might change as well. So we have to go in their psyche, right? So part of the process is to understand why they feel that the market is not ready, and also what are some of other hidden concerns. So it could be that rise in price. Perhaps they might feel that, this microchip controller company that I'm going to work with, are they going to, cause us to sacrifice certain things? So a lot of doubts. When it comes to the emotional connection approach, this is how we use anecdotes and stories in order to pull your heartstring. The feedback was fantastic. So we again tap into the psyche of their demographic, what would unite people and what would make them tick. And they have a very strong sense of identity and culture. And that was many years ago, I think close to 4 or 5 years ago, where the Modi actually rolled out a lot of different initiatives and policies, and they have a goal, right? Like India to be X trillion economy. And people were very excited about that. So how we use statistics, stories, etc., was to say that, okay, this is the goal as a nation that we want to hit. And we can, but at the pace that we're moving, this is the amount of gap that we have. We might not be able to meet it. So every single one of you as business owners, you have a part to play in the Indian's economy. And then the second thing is, we showed that, yes, you might be very comfortable, but do you know that you're actually threatened? So we showed on both sides, right, a very, very vivid case study. There are a lot of startups that are actually disrupting the space. And by space, I mean the medium-sized enterprises. And then there are also big companies, the multinational ones, that are going into different verticals, eating into their market. And this shows that they are sandwiched in between. So it's a cautionary tale, right? It's like happening in front of your eyes, and say that there is no other option but to change. And then we show the positive side to say, okay, what does change look like? In fact, we have all the resources we need. It's very prime, government policies, consumer behaviors are changing. We look at the demographic, people are getting, we have more and more millennials, and their thinking and their usage is very different, to kind of really prove that the market is ready for change. So what I'm using this very elaborated example is, number one, the process is really to understand the underlying concerns, to then identify what are some anecdotes that can actually help to change the belief or to reinforce certain belief that they already have, that it's in your favor or in line with you, and to make it very close to home. Don't use example that like they cannot connect. Use something that they can see in front of their eyes, like around their surrounding, to make it very real, in close proximity. So you bring them to the narrative of the story. And then when you pack all of this together, it actually appeals to many different profiles of people. And then also for the developers, right? They get very excited about new technology. And it's like, yeah, then you showcase case example. How would life change when people were to use certain things? And it's like, yeah, I can think of this and that. So at the end of the conference, a lot of people flocked to the president, just like, wow, the presentation was very heartfelt, and I resonate with this part, that video, it was, yeah. So I think that is the kind of impact that we want to create. And of course, we have both visual, but I think the most important thing is the narrative, and visual is just an aid in order to convey the message much more clearly with impact.
Okay, let me just pause here. I would strongly encourage everyone to click the feedback form on the chat. We would love your feedback. For me personally, this will be my justification on why InnovBite must continue. So we would really appreciate your feedback. And also for Kai-Sin and the HighSpark team, it will be better for them to sort of like what else to improve. Again, it's a continuous learning process. Replying to Kai-Sin, I think in terms of TAE sector, the jargon of authenticity always comes in. So whatever she just described, really just the major expansion of that word authenticity and establishing that authenticity. I think we have enough time for one more question. Any further question from the ground? You can.
Otherwise, yeah, I can share because I promised to share the resources as well as the color palette for people with color deficiency. So if there are no questions, I can share those slides. So I assume everyone has scanned this QR code or typed click on the link,
you can switch
right?
to it because they still be able to see the chat. There's a link there. So while they're tapping away, they could, if they're on the screen or computer, they could still see whatever screen you're sharing. Yeah, please go ahead with the additional resources. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so this, you can take a screenshot of this. These are some of the colors that you can use. Personally, I've done some trial and error. The row 2, where my cursor is the best, as well as blue. So if you notice, a lot of books on data story, charts are designed in blue lines. I think it's for this reason, to make it a lot more accessible. And then in terms of the resource-wise, this is something that you can consider. PictoChart is completely free. So they have a bunch of templates that are available for presentation slides, for social media poster, as well as infographic. If you do want premium features, you can consider using this promo code and you get a 30-day trial worth $29. So this is, we don't take a single cent from this. It's really exclusive for anyone who joins our events as well as participate in a workshop. And more resources, you can also take a screenshot of this. We do have blogs as well as some reports and white papers that you can download with very, very informative as well as a comprehensive way in which you can improve your presentation, both visually as well as in a narrative format. That's also a cost. So we believe that learning should be made accessible to people. And yeah, you can use all of these tools. But if you want to get more advanced, then of course you can speak to me after this for a deeper conversation as to how you can improve. And one final thing, this is also another resource you can consider. I'm pretty sure many of you have heard of WeTransfer. So they have this thing called Collect as well. It's pretty much like Pinterest, where you can compile all your inspiration and store it in one place. You can go to this site, and then I would highly recommend you to curate and archive all the stuff that you think is good, so that when the time comes, you don't have to scramble for inspiration. You can always have something to turn to.
Yeah, we will include the resources shown here on the follow-up email. So if you already missed out the chance to screenshot, we will bring it up again as either screenshots or the link in the follow-up email. I will be sending that by the end of the day, along with the Zoom recording of this session. Okay, it's currently 12. I'm mindful of the time. If there's no further question, I'll just wait for maybe 15 seconds. I'll just allow everyone to go. Thank you so much for sparing an hour in the morning. Hopefully it's a productive hour. You have walked away with some learning points, some inspiration to up your game, not just in designing, but also convincing why designing works to people that matters. Thank you so much. If you have no further questions, feel free to leave the room. And then can we take group photo? Yes, whoever wish to stay for group photo, please do switch on your webcam now. We'll keep it optional as usual, but we could just quickly switch on your webcam. If you're wearing a tie or a collared shirt, just quickly adjust it a little bit. Present the best face forward. Look at the webcam instead of your screen. I'll count it down, so I'll just wait for a bit more people to switch on your webcam. Maybe in 5 seconds time, if it's comfortable for you to switch on your webcam, do it now. Still waiting for a few more people to come in. No worries, the public facing video that we'll publish on our IR website will exclude this portion. So if you are very particular about you don't want your face going out to the public, we will be cutting this portion away from the no issue. Yes, thank you for serving the country. I guess camera device is prohibited. No worries on that. Yeah, so whoever is comfortable, we'll just take the picture now. Buddy, you can just screenshot. I'll just count to 3, 2, 1, go. At the go, just look at the camera instead of the screen. 3, 2, 1, and go. Okay, is it good enough? Okay, great. Yeah. We have a bit more time for the follow-up question. If you have any, I will stay on this chat until everyone has left. If you have any questions for IAL or any IAL initiatives in particular, feel free to stay. Just post it on the chat. Again, you know my email address, so you know how to contact me if you have any follow-up questions. We'll also be including Kai-Sin's contact email address if you are interested to pick up further or maybe engage her on your personal basis to bring up the game, or some kind of advices or just low-hanging fruits on how to best apply the theory she has mentioned today. Thank you so much, Kai-Sin. I think there's no further question at the moment. Thanks so much for spending an hour and a bit of planning.
Oh yeah, I do have a...
Yeah, go ahead.
I do have a small request. So if you have found this session beneficial, right, it would be very helpful if you can share your knowledge and tips with people around you, either on LinkedIn or WhatsApp, whatever. But if you do share it on LinkedIn, you can connect with me. I'm Kai-Sin. We also put it in the email, and you just tag me, in your learning, so that I think more people can be educated and more aware about better communication. So join me on this mission in order to communicate better. Thank you very much, everybody.